Okay, hi everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. My name's Joanna Wilson and I assist the Scottish Home Renewables team here at Energy Saving Trust. Today's webinar is going to focus on self-build properties, and we'll be looking at the technologies you can integrate into building design to reduce your carbon emissions in order to meet building standards, and of course the different forms of support that are also available. This webinar is part of a series we're delivering this year, and that work's funded by the Scottish Government as part of their support for home renewables and energy efficiency. And that's there to help lower Scottish householders' energy bills, meet climate change targets, and also build a lower carbon economy. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping points about our webinar, in case you haven't been to one of these before. The first is that you can hear us, but we can't hear you, so that's perfectly normal, so don't worry about any background noise at your side. Also, if you look to the right of your screen, you'll see a sort of control panel. You can type questions here if any occur to you as we're going through presentations. These aren't visible to other listeners, but we'll be able to see them. We're also recording the webinar and we'll send you a link to it afterwards so you can watch it back later. And we expect the webinar to last approximately sort of 45 minutes, which is good if you're listening on your lunch break. So if we take a quick look at the agenda for today, we've got quite a lot on. First, we've got Jon Stinson, who's a research fellow at the Scottish Energy Centre at Edinburgh Napier University, and he's a module leader within the Architectural Technology undergrad programme with a research focus on human behaviour and energy use in the built environment. So today he'll be covering aspects of the Scottish building standards which relate to renewables and some of the key technologies that can help you use energy more sustainably. Then I'll pass over to my colleague Scott Tipple, who's also in the Scottish Home Renewables team, and he's going to cover some of the advice and support currently available to people who are looking to build their own home. And then finally, sort of to bring it into perspective, we're going to chat with Richard Bond, who's going to join us to discuss his own experience of building his own energy efficient home. Richard's a member of our Green Homes Network, which is a Scotland-wide network of householders that have made improvements to their homes and are happy to share their experiences with others. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have a bit of time and can look at some of your questions. So without any further chat, I'll just pass you over to Jon.
Great, thanks very much, Joanna, and hello to everyone who's joined us today, and thank you to Energy Savings Trust for inviting me here. My portion of the webinar focuses on the theme of renewable energy systems for self-builders, but is very much written from a research perspective and from our experience in the research and development world. So before I start discussing renewable technology options that self-builders might want to consider, I'll preface that with some background and definitions to contextualize the slides and data on specific technologies. There are approximately 30 slides to this presentation, and you can keep track of my location using the icons on the right-hand side there. So the best place to start is by identifying the three main components that we as house builders, designers, homeowners and occupants can explore to help us to reduce our energy demand while still maintaining a good quality of thermal comfort and reducing our fuel bills and our carbon dioxide emissions. So these are widely and well known and include fabric first. That is specifying and installing insulation materials with the appropriate hygrothermal resistance characteristics and thickness to our roofs, walls, floors, plus windows and doors. So also taking care to consider thermal bridging and ventilation heat loss pathways through drafts, etc. It's called fabric first because it tends to be the first thing that designers and builders consider when applying methods to reduce the overall heat demand of the house or of the building. Human behaviour, this is a long debated and heavily researched topic. The prevailing theories and general consensus gravitates towards the use of in-home displays and energy monitors to allow energy users to chart their consumption, with the overall intention of reducing energy consumption periods with when it's not needed. So for new build and something we'll discuss in a few minutes, in-home displays and new home user manuals are now written into the Scottish building standards. So last of these three components is the installation of micro-renewable energy systems or technologies. Whilst the other two components relate directly to the demand side of energy consumption, this component relates specifically to the generation side of the energy that we consume. And this will be the focus of my slides in this presentation. So before we get there, we can't really talk about house building or renewable energy systems without first paying homage to the Scottish building standards. So quite quickly, there are 6 of these standards that are mandatory and 1 which still remains voluntary. And each section speaks directly to an aspect of your dwelling's building design and technology requirements. So today we'll be referring to section 7 quite heavily at the start of this webinar. Then this is the voluntary section that focuses predominantly on sustainability aspects for new house building. And it includes elements from section 3 around ventilation, section 5 around noise, and section 6 around energy. So again, just a brief moment to stop and recognise the existence and the structuring of this section 7 sustainability, because whilst it's still voluntary in some respects, it is still there being used as a standard that we can adhere to make our homes more energy efficient. So this section is unlike any of the other 6 sections in that it uses a metal labelling system to attract designers and builders to use it. And this is the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So if you design and build your home to the other 6 standards, you effectively achieve a bronze standard home. So if at any point in the dwelling's design you add renewable energy systems without fulfilling all of the other aspects of metallic colouring, the label of your home is then specified as being active, meaning that the dwelling is actively generating part or all of its own heat and power requirements. And the more focus you put on each of these aspects, and the higher up the metallic labelling system you go. So three of section 7's, or 2 of section 7's metallic colouring system is divided into 8 aspects. So the silver portion and the gold portion is divided up into 8 distinct aspects. So discussing these aspects in real detail is probably a topic for a completely different webinar. But the important thing to know here is that your home's design will not achieve the full metallic colouring unless the designer demonstrates compliance to all 8 of these aspects. So it's not a pick and choose exercise. You have to demonstrate the design satisfies all 8 before going up the metallic colour chain. And the big takeaway here is that 5 of these aspects relate either directly or indirectly to renewable energy systems and renewable energy technologies. So lastly, the evaluation of whether or not your design achieves certain aspects is completely predicated on the output of the energy performance software that we use to construct energy performance, and what the industry call SAP. So there's a new term. So what is SAP? So, well, anything related to any aspect of your dwelling's energy requirement and energy performance is defined within this SAP, the Standard Assessment Procedure software. So you really can't work in the domain of domestic dwellings and domestic construction without the use of SAP and understanding what it requires. So again, SAP probably does deserve its own webinar, but the important thing is that we recognize it here on our way to talking about micro-renewable systems. And the big takeaway here is that SAP is a software used to define your home's energy efficiency, and then ultimately produces all the all-important energy performance certificate, or the EPC. So why is this important, and why are you hearing about SAP when you showed up to hear about renewable energy systems? Well, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but before that, you should be aware of some terms used by SAP, which are used to evaluate whether or not your home should be built under the guidance of section 6, and that's the energy one. So when your designer is virtually constructing your building, your home, in this SAP software, one of the final outputs is the DER, or what we call the dwelling emission rate. And whilst your designer is doing that, the SAP software effectively creates a comparator or notional dwelling that is built to the very basic standards of energy efficiency. And that's what we call the TER, or the target emission rate. So ultimately, your designer needs to virtually construct a dwelling whose DER is lower than the TER. And the greater the difference, then the further down that metallic colouring scale you get in section 7. And when we say emission rates, we're explicitly referring to the carbon dioxide, the CO2 emissions that are emitted from your dwelling during its operational life. So that has nothing to do with the CO2 characteristics of how the house is built or the materials it's built from. It's specifically relating to the electricity and the heating that you use to keep the home powered and warm. So, and according to, where are we? And according to the standards in section 7, your dwelling will achieve silver in aspect 1, which is related to CO2 emissions, if your dwelling's DER is lower by any measure than the TER. If the dwelling emission rate, if the DER is lower than 30% or greater than 30%, 43% or more than the TER, then the home will achieve that gold standard. So when your DER is lower than, is better than 43% over the TER, then your home achieves gold in that aspect for carbon dioxide emissions. So final few words on section 7 before we get into the relevance of all this in relation to renewable energy systems. SAP also produces a very valuable number, and this is what we refer to as the space heating requirement, and that's the amount of energy your dwelling needs theoretically to keep its occupants warm. And that's the total per year, total energy requirement per year, and divided by the total floor area of the dwelling you're trying to heat. So this number is used. It's used in some capacity to measure, to size the heating system that you need to install. And it's also there then coming back to this fabric first thing we mentioned earlier on. The more energy efficient your building fabric is, walls, floors, windows, doors, etc., the lower that number will be, and then the less work your heating system will have to do to achieve this number. So it all begins to tie together. And section 7, aspect 2 for space heating is also a target for silver and gold. So if you're building a house or a flat, then you have these guidance in aspect 2 as to what is the target you should be aiming below. So in our example here, we've got a home whose space heating requirement is 13 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, and that falls under, for a house, that falls under the 30 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year for gold. So it's essentially a gold standard home in terms of aspect 2. So back to other aspects within section 7 that speaks directly to renewable energy systems, and this is now for water heating. So that last aspect, aspect 2, was for space heating, and this is for water heating. So the building standards do treat both as separately, even though you might be getting the energy from the same power source. So it's affected, this aspect is affected by the size and type of renewable energy system that you install on your dwelling, and the higher the percentage of the hot water demand met by your preferred renewable energy system, then the higher up that metallic colouring scale you go. So again, there's a theme here: getting closer to gold, getting closer to platinum is, so moving from bronze to silver and silver to gold requires you to do quite a bit more in terms of carbon dioxide savings. So, last words on building standards in section 7 and concluding our background portion of the presentation. Aspect 5 is often an overlooked aspect that might be perceived as quite trivial when you read the standards. However, it is potentially the most important because it specifies what in-home display and the new home user manual that we mentioned earlier on as one of our key components for energy savings. So research is quite clear on this. To make the most of your newly built energy efficient home, all the characteristics and to keep those energy bills low is very much predicated on energy use behaviours. So you can build an extremely energy efficient home, but use it unwisely, and that can really affect your overall energy consumption, knocking on to your energy bills, knocking on to your CO2 emissions. So we must provide occupiers with tools to use to help them understand and use the new homes effectively. And this by no means excludes self-build. Just because you understand your home much more than someone who buys a house from a mass house builder, this doesn't exclude you from this standard. So now let's bring that all together. What you're looking for in all the understanding of section 7 and SAP and how it all ties together is, got an example here, a real world example of a SAP output. Now recently we've witnessed the introduction of a new iteration of SAP called SAP 2012. So dwellings that previously passed on SAP 2009 and therefore passed the energy and CO2 requirements allowing it to be built are not passing the energy and CO2 requirements for SAP 2012. So if you're not influenced by the notion of renewable energy systems because of your building's location, i.e. if you're off the gas grid and you're looking into options for renewables and how to provide more efficient energy supplies, or if you're not being motivated by the cost benefits of renewables, or you're not being motivated by the environmental benefits of renewable energy systems, then please be aware that it has become and will become increasingly challenging to design and construct new dwellings without the integration of some type of renewable energy system. So we're on this policy chart, so to speak. So right, we've spoken around the topic of renewable energy systems for long enough. Let's get into the core of this webinar. For the avoidance of any doubt, when I refer to renewable energy systems, I mean technologies that generate energy through naturally reoccurring phenomenon. So that's solar and the movement of wind and water. And explicitly, these are energy generation technologies that replace technology depending on burning fossil fuels. So the next big definition that we need to concern ourselves with is scale. So here we introduce two new terms that are now commonplace, and this is macro and micro, or more simply big and small. So macro renewable energy systems are those you see as parts of onshore or offshore wind farms, or solar farms, or giant hydro dams. The last half of my presentation is going to focus solely on micro level of renewables, and those that you will be seeking to attach to your building's fabric or placing within the building's curtilage somewhere. So I won't be referring to meso technologies. Those are in the middle of micro and macro, like community and neighbourhood heat and power systems, or hydrogen systems, or district heat systems, and those are definitely for a different webinar. So let's do a quick sense check. I'm going to just jump forward a little bit. I got this in the wrong order. So let's do a quick sense check on reminding everyone of some high school physics before we crack into our definitions and your options for renewable systems. So you'll hear me saying words like kilowatts and kilowatt hours, and you might already be very familiar with both these. Most of those who are concerned with inspecting your energy bills will definitely be well versed with kilowatt hours, and the more engineering minded amongst us will definitely understand what kilowatts are. But importantly, the words power and energy and the units kilowatts and kilowatt hours are absolutely not interchangeable. Your renewable energy systems or technologies will be classified by its power rating. They'll be classified as kilowatts, but its effect on your overall energy bill will relate specifically to your home's energy performance, and that's stated in kilowatt hours. So manufacturers, suppliers, installers really avoid giving you any data on kilowatt hours, which is really what most of us are really looking for. The big question being, how much will this save me on my energy bill? The reality is, and because these technologies are linked to natural occurring phenomena, the system's energy performance in kilowatt hours is really dependent on where your house is located and the positioning of that system in relation to the proximity of your home. So, where are we now? So I think we back a slide. Sorry about that. So first of all, the following 10 slides are configured pretty much the same way, in which you'll find general rules of thumb that we have created over the years of studying renewables that help you work out the size or how many of each technology you might need, important design considerations and additional technologies that you need to be aware of when considering different options. And for most technologies, I've included some primary data charts showing the performance of some of our technologies from our various real-world test sites around Scotland. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go through to go into a lot of detail for each of these technologies. So I'll do an introduction to each, and you can use these slides as reference materials in the future. So solar PV is, where are we now? So there we go. So solar PV is, or to give it its full title, photovoltaics is, this is the first of 2 solar panels that I'll be speaking about, but both panels do very different things. So the word solar panel can be confusing until you specify which one you actually mean. So the efficiency and performance of solar PV is very much predicated on its location on your building and its relation to the sun. So for those who are designing energy efficient homes, they tend to orientate the large parts of pitch roofs to as near due south as possible. So we are quite fortunate in that our pitch roof designs for our homes tend to be angled between 30 and 45 degrees, which conveniently is also the optimal angle for solar PV panels. So the equation for energy power, or for technology power output, and the overall energy generation for PV panels is relatively linear. The more panels you have, the more instantaneous power you will receive during times of peak sunlight, and the more energy will be generated over the course of the summer months. So solar PV are by far the go-to technology for most house builders, least of all because of its ease of installation and because it just naturally sits on our roof. So moving on, wind turbines, they really have had quite a shaky rise to fame. And there's a reason we don't see as many of them on micro scale as we do at macro scale. And there's a reason why we don't see so many wind turbines as compared to PVs. The reason is for this is down to location and positioning of the wind type and the wind type. Micro wind turbines have the ability to rotate and find the wind, which makes them really effective. However, we must be concerned about the type of wind that our wind turbine receives. So when wind bounces off trees and around geographical formations like hills and cliffs and around buildings, these create vortices. And that's really bad. That's what we call dirty wind. It's not good for the wind turbine. Even though the wind might be blowing really strong, if the wind is in a vortex or quite turbulent, it means the wind turbine is much less effective. So micro wind becomes really effective when they're positioned perfectly, away from trees, away from hills and cliffs, and away from buildings. So that's why we don't see so many building mounted wind turbines anymore. But when positioned well, even the small wind turbines are effective, and their typical energy output is the invert of the energy output from solar panels. So that graph looks inverted from the graph you saw for solar PV. So they produce more energy in the wind, where PV produces more in the summer. So they can create quite good counterparts across the year. So the next technology on the electric production or generation scale is hydro. So we're used to seeing these things at massive, at macro level, but we're beginning to see a trend coming down at the micro level. But unusual for renewable technologies, hydro systems have a completely different definition for small water turbines. So when you're looking at domestic energy demand or power demand, you're kind of around the 5 kilowatt range. And hydro is quite unique in this, where when you go around below the 5 kilowatt range for hydro, they're actually called pico. So that will help you to refine your searches if you do have a good water course on your site and something you want to consider. The nice thing about hydro is that, well, depending on the stream and the size of the water course and the fall in the water course, the energy output for this can be quite constant. But the efficiencies are a bit like wind. The efficiencies aren't as great. So the things you need to be aware of is if you have a water course on your site and it looks like a viable option, there's really a relationship between the flow and between the drop in the water going down at a certain height, and that can very easily be calculated up even on the back of an envelope, and you can work out what your your power supply is going to be. And if it's constant, if the water doesn't freeze over the winter, or if it doesn't surge during the spring, then that power supply is going to be fairly constant. Right, so moving away from electricity and looking now at heat generation. So I'm going to move through these quite quickly because we're kind of pressed for time just now. But the thing to be aware of is the technology that comes behind your renewables. So with all water and space heating technologies, there'll be a piece of technology you need to be aware of called a thermal store. Now, this is essentially a rebrand of a hot water tank, only it is more highly insulated, and it's got multiple entry points along the vertical length of the thing. So different heating systems will drop temperature into the hot water tank at different locations to help de-stratify the hot water in there, slipping in the thermodynamics there. But the important thing is you need to find space for this thing. If you're considering some type of heat system, like solar water heaters or heat pumps, etc., you need to find somewhere to put this. The nice thing is if you have one, there's going to be ports left in that thermal store to then retrofit technologies down the line. So let's kick off with solar water heaters. And the big takeaway from solar water heaters are the energy output of these is not linear. So it's not like PV. The more solar water heaters you add doesn't translate directly into more hot water. So once you kind of leave the one panel or the one or two panels, the efficiency really does drop off. So we've got a chart here, and this has been normalized per person in a home. So it's a cluster diagram. So the overall demand is in red, and the energy generation per month is in green. So you can see that it can do quite a bit. The most important thing is that this is another solar panel. It is referred to as solar thermal or solar water heaters, and it is restricted or limited to the same design principles as the PV. It needs to face the sun, it needs to be quite close to due south, and angled at 30 to 45 degrees. So the big takeaway here is that solar water heaters are not a standalone piece of equipment. And that is quite important because any water that you're storing in your home for hot water, for example, it needs to be heated over 60 degrees Celsius at least once a day over a period of 1 hour a day. And that's to kill off bacteria like Legionella. Solar water heaters can possibly achieve that 2 or 3 times during the year, but for the vast majority of the time, they can't do that alone. So they really are a secondary backup system for some other type of water heating. They're quite effective because what they ultimately do is they preheat cold water coming in. So it means then the primary heating system doesn't have to work so hard to get your hot water above that 60-degree threshold. So 2 varieties of heat pump. I know there's multiple other ones, but these are the ones I really want to focus on. So air source heat pump And these tend to get quite a bad rep because you're thinking colder parts of the UK and Scotland, the air is cold, so how could you possibly catch any heat from it? The reality is the thermodynamics behind this technology compresses and handles heat in a very different way from perhaps what we're used to. So they can be very effective. Got some rules of thumb there for sizing a air source heat pump, but the thing for you to be aware of is the all-important coefficient of performance, the COP. Now, sometimes, and this is quite overlooked when it comes to specifying or thinking about heat pumps, is that heat pumps are only renewable, can only benefit from absorbing warm air from the atmosphere if you're able to power it from electricity. So you can't simply install a heat pump without having some form of electricity supply going to it. So that's where we get into the COP, this coefficient of performance ratio. So for every 1 kilowatt of energy or power, the electricity power that you give to the heat pump, it then can generate between 2, 3, maybe even 4 in some instances, kilowatts worth of heat. And that's quite important whenever you're considering how they perform over time. So the graph there shows the COP, which is the coefficient of performance. Another way of looking at this is percentage of efficiency. So once you get to 1 equals 100% efficiency, and over 1, you're talking 200% efficient, etc., etc. So these are from multiple properties in Scotland along the central belt, and you see the COP, the coefficient performance, always stays above 1. So you're always getting more heat back than the power you're putting in, which is very good for heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps work pretty much the exact same way. The only difference is where it gets its heat from, being ground source. Some people tend to think that the heat comes from geothermal heat reservoirs. That's a bit of a myth. The heat collectors for ground source heat pumps is very much affected by the solar radiation on the first couple of meters of the Earth's surface. So it really is absorbing heat from the Earth's surface that's been preheated by the sun during the day. But then the Earth, those first few meters at the top of the Earth, they act as a thermal battery, and they tend to hold temperatures a bit better than air does. So that means your ground source heat pump runs a little bit more efficient. The very important thing here is the sheer amount of size and space you need around your home to lay these coils or to lay boreholes for you to drop your collectors into. So biomass is something that's becoming a real option for certainly communities, sparsely populated communities, rural communities that are off the gas grid and where electricity just doesn't add up in terms of efficiencies or in terms of cost payback, etc. So biomass is great, but again, it's only really considered renewable or considered sustainable if the wood that you're using for the biomass pallets comes from a sustainably managed source. And you have to consider then using things like underfloor heating that can run at much lower temperatures than radiators to make this thing run efficiently. The big takeaway here for biomass is that it does require a fair amount of size. So if you're really looking at quite a large building, maybe over the 200 meter squared size, then biomass is great because the amount of space you're allocating to house the biomass and then house all that material to feed the biomass boiler, then that is economy of scale and it ranks up. Some equations there for you to kind of think about how much space you might need and how much space you need for the materials. Because unlike wood burning stoves, the biomass boilers, they do drink a lot of these little wood pellets. So I'm going to wrap up by looking at heat recovery options, sometimes overlooked in the realm of renewable energy systems, but these are becoming more prevalent because as we go down the pathway of Section 7 sustainability and making homes more energy efficient, then there's less we can do to actually help achieve its efficiency, and what that leaves us with is recovering heat that escapes through ventilation or heat that escapes through exhausting air or water. So as buildings become more airtight to try and address the balance of losing heat through ventilation heat loss, through drafts, what have you, we're looking at effectively sealing up our buildings for ventilation. So to compensate that and to be considerate of things like condensation and indoor air quality, we have mechanical ventilation systems that run continuously to help maintain that air quality. Now, if you're considering a quite airtight building to help achieve its efficiency, then recovering that heat of the air that you're exhausting just makes an awful lot of sense, because again, that preheats the cooler, fresher air coming in, and it means your energy system, whatever it may be, whether biomass or heat pump, doesn't have to work so hard to reach those temperatures. Last two pieces of technology I think is just worth kind of giving a nod to, because they do appear in SAP, is our flue gas heat recovery system and our wastewater heat recovery system. This system isn't particularly efficient because it's essentially a bolt-on for most combi boilers, gas combi boilers, and the reality is we've gone pretty far down the line as far as fundamental thermodynamics allows us to make combi boilers efficient. What this piece of kit does, essentially, it recovers some of the heat from the exhausted air that is put out in the back of the boiler, and then it preheats the water coming into the boiler. So it can be an option, but maybe not as effective as the other ones we've spoken about today. Something that's kind of hitting our industry in some way is the wastewater heat recovery system. This is just a no-brainer. This is simply putting a heat recovery system on any of your appliances that exhausts a lot of really warm water. So I'm thinking showers, bathtubs, dishwashers, and washing machines. So you're dumping out water that's possibly 60 degrees or around there. So recovering the heat from that and preheating cold water coming in to save your boiler from working so hard, that's just really a no-brainer. And the nice thing about this is it doesn't take up a lot of space. So apologies for running over time on that. I really should practice these things before coming out. But the reason why I selected those technologies is because they're the ones that you'll find inside SAP. They're the ones that have been around the longest. They're the ones that have been really proven themselves. They're the ones that we've got most data on, and they're the ones that we can see as being the most reliable. But always remember, when it comes to renewable energy systems, whether for electricity, space or water heating, or heat recovery, you're always dependent on some natural phenomenon. So it really is hard to get those data sets on how much energy you're gonna get during its lifespan. Ultimately, it's there to help reduce your overall energy bill. So the final big takeaway from this is, if you do install a renewable energy system, something like solar PV, these systems aren't fit and forget. You can't just fit them on, expect them to be efficient and then run and then leave them where they are. They also require a certain amount of behavior change. So things like running washing machines, running tumble dryers, running dishwashers during peak daylight hours, that's when you get the most from things like solar, like photovoltaic, solar PV, etc. So there is subtle little behavior changes you have to adapt when you're thinking about incorporating renewable systems. So that's it for me, and I'll pass back to Scott.
Thanks, John. A lot of information there for self-builders to consider, which highlights how stringent building standards requirements are, and the importance and benefit of generating heat and electricity on a micro level. Now, I want to spend a few minutes just kind of covering some of the support on offer to self-builders. You may or may not be glad to know that it will not be as technical as John's presentation, so feel free to sit back and relax. Just want to highlight at this stage that if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask on the webinar panel on your screen, there is a tab for questions. So if you want to ask anything there, we should have time at the end to answer them. So let's see. So here at the Energy Saving Trust, we offer support to self-builders in Scotland in the form of either advice or financial support. So advice is either provided through our website, which hosts a wealth of information on different energy efficiency improvements and renewable technologies, or through the advice network known as Home Energy Scotland. So Home Energy Scotland essentially acts as a network of advice centres across Scotland. It's funded by the Scottish Government to offer free and impartial advice on matters relating to energy efficiency, renewable technologies, transport, water and waste. So to find out more about any of these topics, individuals can call the number at the bottom left of the screen, and they will be connected with one of the local advisors who will be in a position to answer questions and just determine eligibility for any support schemes. So there is, however, a lot of information for any one advisor to kind of remember and cover during a phone call, which is why the service includes specialist advisors who have extensive knowledge to cover the more technical subjects such as renewables or hard to treat properties. So these specialist advisors are located across Scotland from Ayrshire to Shetland and will be in a position to discuss your self-build plans either over the phone or in person. So this support can be offered on a basic level, just discussing the different renewable technologies that might be suitable for your property, or this could be done on a more advanced level where an assessment of your property or your proposed development is carried out by reviewing things like your floor plans, your design specification, or architect's drawings. So this advanced assessment, let's call it, is made possible because we have this bespoke modeling software, which essentially it's been developed following the SAP methodology that John made reference to before, which kind of works in the background for energy performance certificates. But importantly, this software that we've developed, it allows us to overwrite some of the default assumptions and U values and create a range of scenarios or possible routes to improve your property. So specialist advisors will be able to take the information from your planned development, input these into the modeling software. And yeah, like I said, this allows us to model the building to the proposed specification, where we can then create scenarios which represent alternative options. So for example, if you're intending to install electric heating system, we can model the cost and carbon savings of integrating solar PV into the design or installing an alternative heating system such as an oil boiler or heat pump. So and at the end of this, essentially, the model will create a report which is called a home energy improvements report. And this also acts as a eligible energy report if you're to access funding through one of our financial support schemes, which I'll cover in a minute. But we essentially recognise that mistrust in the underlying technology is one of the main barriers to the uptake of renewables, which is why, with the support of the Scottish Government, we are able to offer this free and impartial advice service that is bespoke, it's tailored to the individual's needs, whether that be just to find out further information on the technology or if you're wanting to estimate those savings. So one of the other main barriers to the uptake of renewables is the associated costs. So thankfully, there are a few financial schemes available to incentivize self-builders to integrate renewables into their property's design, which include a Home Energy Scotland loan, which is something that we administer, the Domestic Renewable Heat Incentive, and the Feed-in Tariff Scheme. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here as there's a wealth of information on our website, and we have covered the available funding in the past webinar, which you can access on our YouTube channel, the link for which should be at the bottom left of your screen. But yeah, so the Home Energy Scotland loan essentially is an interest-free loan funded by the Scottish Government and administered by ourselves. It's designed to help overcome the upfront costs of installing renewables, and includes kind of energy efficiency improvements in energy storage systems as well. It also covers connections to a district heating scheme that is powered by renewable technologies. Unfortunately for self-builders, the loan scheme will not cover energy efficiency improvements such as insulation and glazing, but it will cover the other improvements. You also have the renewable heat incentive, or the domestic renewable heat incentive, which is designed to incentivize early adopters of renewable heat technologies by making quarterly payments over 7 years for any heat that's been generated, such as heat from a heat pump or solar thermal or biomass boiler. And the alternative for this, if you generate electricity, is the feed-in tariff scheme. So yeah, again, this is designed to kind of incentivize early adopters of renewable technologies that generate electricity. This will be a series of payments over 20 years, not only for the electricity you generate, but also the electricity that you generate, that you export to the national grid. It's worth noting, though, that there is an ongoing consultation on the future of this scheme, but it does look likely that it will close in spring next year. So it's still open to new applicants, but yeah, we anticipate that it's going to end at the end of the financial year. So if you're looking for more information on any of those schemes, you can either view our past webinars, contact the Home Energy Scotland Advice Service, or browse the relevant pages on our website. So the website not only contains information on the different technologies and financial support available, but there's also a host of tools which you should be able to find useful. I've highlighted a few of them on this slide, but yeah, most relevant for these are the ones that are most relevant for self-builders. There are more. The first of these is the Solar Energy Calculator, which allows you to enter your postcode and some additional details about your property just to see how suitable a solar PV system might be. So it provides kind of estimates for your savings on your fuel bills and gives you an idea of the payments that you would receive through that feed-in tariff scheme. Another one of those tools is the Renewable Selector tool, which highlights the potential suitability of different heat and electricity generating technologies by asking a series of questions about your property. For example, if you're looking to determine the suitability of solar PV, there will be a page that will ask you about your property type, roof characteristics, and at the end, once you answer these questions, you'll essentially get this report which provides info on the different suitable technologies for your property. Another tool that we host on the website is the Renewable Installer Finder tool. So this allows users to search for certified installers that operate in their local area. You can filter by the distance from your home or a specific technology, and it also includes different reviews from past customers. So it's a very handy tool if you're looking to install renewable technology, but you're unsure where to find installers or who to trust. And then finally, we've got the Green Homes Network there. So this is another resource which I'm not going to cover just now, as I'm about to pass you over to my colleague Joe, who's going to give you an overview of the network, and we'll be discussing one of the case studies with a network member. So really that's all from me for now. Just really a quick summary of the support that's available to individuals looking to build their own home, but really it doesn't matter whether you're a homeowner, private landlord or self-builder. There's a bunch of information and resources on the website, and the Home Energy Scotland advice team are there to support you on a range of topics. I've by no means covered all the support available, so I strongly advise anyone looking to save money on their energy bills, improve their property, or to basically live more sustainably to give Home Energy Scotland a call. As I said, it's all free and impartial, so there's no hidden agenda, just friendly, helpful advice. So I'll now pass you back over to Joe, who'll give you an overview of the Green Homes Network and discuss a case study with one of the members. So thanks everyone for listening.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Like Scott was saying, the Green Homes Network is available on the tools section of our website. So it is a tool, but it's a little bit unusual in that it's a database made up of real life people, basically. So rather than being data or anything like that, it's a network of households in Scotland that have installed energy efficiency measures or renewable technologies or both. And there's a case study for each one, and you can search the tool by area or property type, or you can look just at a measure you might be interested in installing, and then you can read case studies, find out what people have actually done in real life and maybe what they wouldn't do in future if they did it again. And in some cases you can also arrange through us to visit a property to find out a bit more from the householder. And it's not just eco builds and everything that we've got on the tool. It's also historic buildings, flats, listed buildings, tenements, detached houses from the 60s. It's just a big load of different types of building that you can hopefully find something that's relevant to you. And you can find that by either from the tools page of our website or directly from that link at the bottom of this slide. And we've got Richard Bond, who is one of our Green Homes Network members, and he's a bit you know, he's a bit more towards the eco-build side of things. Richard had his home designed and built and is extremely energy efficient now. So I'm just going to say, hi Richard, thanks very much for joining us.
Hi Joe, and
Hi there.
hello everybody.
Hi. No, thanks for coming on to share your story with us. Just going to quickly show a picture of your home. So this is your house that you had designed. Can I just ask, what were your motivations for building your own home instead of, renovating or purchasing a new property?
Well, my wife and I felt quite passionate about trying to eliminate fossil fuels from our lives, not just the house, but the personal transport as well. And we believe in example. We think that when you see things and touch them and smell them, then it really does begin to mean something. Yeah.
Oh, so it was actually motivated by environmental impact reasons as well. It wasn't just about having a purpose-built home with to your own specifications. That's really encouraging. Can you tell us a little bit about your home? And sort of insulation and renewable technologies you did install.
Yes, I think slide 2 shows this quite nicely. The key thing is avoiding the heat loss. Not the generation of power. And there are 3 aspects to the secret of that. One, of course, is all round massive insulation. And by massive, we mean beyond the building control regulations.
Okay. So did your property actually surpass, building standards?
At the time, it certainly did. I don't know what they are now, but I'm sure it still surpasses them, yeah. And secondly, you need to get it airtight. And because the drafts just take heat away. But of course, if you have airtightness, you're going to have issues with ventilation and exhausting, stale air and damp air. So you have to have the whole house heat exchange ventilation system that was mentioned in the first talk.
Yeah.
Now, number 1 and 2 can be done perfectly well with timber frame houses. But number 3 is the third part of the secret, which comes in only with masonry build. And that's having, a high thermal mass inside the insulation.
And was that something that your architect helped you with, or was this something that you researched yourself and were able to ask for when you first thought of getting your new home?
Well, we researched for several years before I even started looking for an architect. But we did have a specialist architect, Andrew Yates of EcoArc in Cumbria, who fully understands all these technologies. And he did the detailed design, yes.
Yeah. And do you know how you ensured things like airtightness and the envelope of the house was that part of the design of the shape of the property even? Was that something that your architect?
A lot of the detail of construction is involved with that, particularly, as I say, with a masonry property. The detail, not only of the design, and you can see on that picture there's a lot of fine detail in sort of taping and avoiding cold and things like that. But also in the construction, it requires very close supervision. And this is where I had to be on site as really building superintendent to act as the go-between between the architect's design and the tradesmen who were not used to these technologies.
Okay, so you found that helpful to be there to sort of oversee everything, almost as a sort of builder's foreman, yeah. Yeah. And can I just ask, so that's sort of the envelope of your property and keeping all the heat in and everything. How are your power requirements met in your property now?
Well, if you go to slide 10, there's a useful picture there.
Yeah.
The point is that if you've avoided heat loss, how you actually heat the house becomes less significant. And this design was passive solar, which means sun shining through the windows, essentially,
Oh, right.
boosted by this lean-to conservatory. Now, the wall on the left, you see, is external insulation with triple glazed small windows. But this is a double glazed conservatory facing south, with, again, massive heat storage in the floor and the walls.
Because to me, that looks just like a normal conservatory, but that actually helps to heat your home.
Absolutely, yes. For particularly spring and autumn, it's very useful. I mean, at the moment, we've not had much sun for a few days, but what little we've had has been heating that up. And as I'm sitting here now, the doors and those little windows are open, taking the heat into the house.
Okay. And you mentioned you've got you've also have south-facing windows, in addition to the conservatory. How big do they need to be to allow that to work as an air heater?
Well, I think it's a bit of an inexact science. Plenty is about as precise as I could get. One thing I did learn was that the triple glazed windows actually put less heat into the house than double glazed, but of course they stop it going out. So you're not in such danger of overheating.
Yeah, was that a concern when you were designing the house about maybe keeping too much heat in, or? I
was concerned because in our former home we had a very large skylight, double glazed, and the room used to get very hot.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm taking from this then is that although you have installed some renewable technologies in your home, you don't actually have a one main renewable heating system or any sort of central heating system.
Right. There is no heating system. But if you go to slide number 11, the next one, we do have a backup system. Now, obviously, in December and January, there is virtually nothing coming from the sun. And depending on weather, November and February may also require some assistance. Now, this is what we call a masonry stove. It's a wood burner, but it's encased in massive masonry with channels for the flue gases to go down and dump their heat. So basically, from that firebox that you can see, yes, heat comes straight out through the glass, but there's no overheating because the rest goes up into a top chamber, down the sides, along the front, into that heated bench on the left, then into the masonry chimney, and only into the flue above that. So by the time it's run around there, all the heat has been dumped.
Right. So even though it's a stove, it's not a single room heater. It is heating the full property.
It is central and it is heating.
Oh wow!
It actually goes through the wall that's in the picture there. So the back of the stove is heating the other main room.
And can I just check? Does that also provide hot water as well, or do you have another method of providing hot water?
It can be designed to do that. We could have had a boiler in. In fact, we could have even have a bread baking oven in the top chamber, but we chose not to because we wanted to focus this on heating the house, and we have other technologies for heating water.
And so, what do you have for heating water?
Yes, on slide 8. Sorry, on slide 9, you'll see the tubes, the vacuum tubes you mentioned. We have 3 square meters of those and a 300-litre hot water tank, as you see in the right-hand picture. Now, that gives you plenty hot water, of course, in summer and good weather, and it supports the heating of the water for the rest of the year.
So do you supplement it in the winter months with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you consider in winter, water's coming into the house maybe at 3 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
So if that thing is heating even to 15 or 20, it's doing a great job.
And you mentioned, so you've got 3 meter squares system on your roof, but you also have solar PV on your roof as well.
We do, yeah. On picture 8, you'll see that.
Oh yeah, so you put them on together, so size wasn't an issue or anything like that, or?
No, in fact, we put those on later. We use a turbine to cover the electricity demand for the house, and that works perfectly well. But we decided to run an electric car as well, and for that, I calculated we needed 12 of these panels to give us 10,000 miles a year.
So you've got electricity for the home and transport as well. Do you
we do use as well, by the way.
You do all use the battery, did you say?
Yes, the renewables feed into batteries.
Okay. And do you find you often need to take electricity from the national grid, or do you find that being able to store your electricity is, is sufficient?
We take quite a bit from the grid, so we're buying and selling from our supplier. I think the amount we generate is roughly equal to the amount we bring in. But of course, we earn more money from what we generate than what we sell.
In fact, I think you've got a handy graph actually to sort of show the difference between your costs, and I just show that. Yeah. So one question I was going to ask, and I can probably tell what the answer is from just looking at this graph actually, is that do you think installing high levels of insulation and renewables in your home was cost effective?
Well, to be honest, the only way we could do this project was by ignoring payback periods, cost benefits and such like, because I believe they genuinely do mislead you. We've come out of this at the other end, and that's the picture for our direct energy costs. Yeah, we've put capital in there, but the whole project was substituting capital investment for future renewable costs. And of course, when you do cost benefits in the future, it's highly distorted because benefits in the future are discounted to nothing, as our damage that's caused in the future is disregarded. So our economic tools are misleading us here.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose these are estimates, and you make a good point about the fact that obviously you have to put in there's the capital investment to put in, and obviously all sorts of things like occupancy and energy use, be very specific to certain households, etc.
If you look at the previous slide, number 12, this is what I can consider to be the real picture. If you click on that, it'll highlight the significant points. The old house, which was a Victorian 1850s house, we'd really done as much as we could. You can see on the left-hand side, very poor ratings, F, and the potential was hardly higher. Now
that's the 44, isn't it? The 38 was for your rating, and then the 44 was represented how much better you could make it.
So shifting to the right-hand side now, this house is actually off the scale. I mean, we're AA rated.
Yeah. You don't see an awful lot of A-rated EPCs, but yeah, that's incredible. And yeah, so it looks like from your EPC at least, it says you can't actually improve the energy efficiency or environmental impacts of your
We've done all we can.
Yeah, you've done everything.
And well, that was my guidance for the build.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose if you had the part of your motivation was environmental impact, and it goes to show that if you focus on that as well, you can't. You're going to improve your energy efficiency rating too. I'm just going to end by asking: are you happy with the design and function of your home? Would you recommend self-building to others if that was a feasible option for them?
If you're able to do from scratch, which I accept many people aren't because they're involved with retrofit. But and if you feel confident to do a self-built, yes, I highly recommend it. I mean, we're very satisfied with the house. It's very comfortable, and it's very low cost to run. And what more do you want?
Well, can I just ask one final question, which is just, would you do anything differently if you did it again, or are you completely happy with how everything went?
Well, I've made mistakes, a couple of mistakes. So there's always something, but nothing's very significant. I mean, the only regret is not having done it 10 years earlier.
Oh, well, that speaks well of self-building then. Okay, well, thank you very much, Richard. That was really helpful and really interesting to hear. I'm just going to check with my colleagues, see if we've had any questions from people.
So the first one we have is, how much should my architect know about renewables, including how much will cost to install and the fuel bill cost compared to other options?
Right. So that's a good question. There's multiple parts to that. The first part is, how much should your architect know? The topic of renewables falls very much under sustainability, which we've covered in today's talks, and each of your professionals in putting your building together, the design team, the building team, etc., the surveying team, etc., they'll all be chartered by various different chartered bodies. So you'll have organisations like RIMS, which is the Royal Institute of Architects Scotland, CIAT, the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists, RICS, the Chartered Institute of Surveyors, CAOB, Chartered Institute of Buildings, etc. And each of them require their members to demonstrate knowledge and learning in the field of sustainability. Now, that's quite an open definition, and so some will choose to specialise in renewables, some won't, but others will have everyone will have a good understanding of what renewables are and how they work, because they have to undertake webinars like this. They're called CPD events, and they have to keep their knowledge up to speed. It keeps them competitive, etc. So there will be architects who are members of organisations like Scottish Ecological Design Association, and those are architectural firms who have made a conscientious choice to focus on low energy design homes with renewables and such. So they're the types of organisations that you could focus on if you're looking to contact somebody. And then, how much will it cost to install? That is a very good question. Innovate UK, one of the big funding bodies for research and development in the UK, had commissioned a piece of work by the Sweet Co, I think it was at the time, spelled with 2 T's, and they had done a retrofit example of how much money it costs to install certain technologies. Even though it's retrofit, it still pretty much applies to new build as well in some respects. So there is knowledge out there. The problem again is those numbers do depend very much on the location of where you're building, and depends on the type of system you've been specified as well. And then what was this third part to that then? How much will they cost, and fuel bill cost compared to other options? That's something that, as Scott and Joanna has spoken about earlier, having these Home Energy Scotland online tools, that's really where they support that. These calculators are great, and these calculators used to be, once upon a time, predicated or based upon theoretical numbers, but now Home Energy Scotland and the Energy Savings Trust team have real world data from real world sites, so you're getting those accuracies are becoming even better.
Perfect. No, great. Cheers for that, John. A couple more there. They're kind of linked, so I think yeah, I'll ask you both questions, and then you're probably best giving one complete answer. So 2 questions are: how do I find architects and builders with experience of installing renewable systems, and what are the benefits to a self-builder of achieving the gold platinum kind of standards that you mentioned earlier?
Again, yeah, very good sets of questions. So how do you find an architect or builder with experience? It's going to come down to from an architect's perspective, it's going to come down to their design ethos and what's on their website, and it's going to be coming down to how competitive they want to be. So the construction industry in the UK, it is predominantly occupied by small, medium businesses. These are businesses with less than 20 employees and such. So different architects will specialise in different areas. But we're seeing now, specifically in Scotland, we're seeing architects and builders focusing on that green agenda. But the only way to really define who has experience is by trawling through their website and see, because a lot of them will want to advertise their abilities, so they'll be dropping on examples and case studies as to what they're done in the past. that's kind of how you do that. So architects' websites can be a little bit footery, where they tend to be like flash websites with lots of big pretty pictures. If you see lots of renewables on there, then you know you know they've done something with renewables. And yeah, it does link into this next question: what are the benefits to a self-builder of achieving gold and platinum? Well, once upon a time, Section 7 was completely predicated on creating this friendly competition amongst the house builders to generate interest within the buying population, house building population, to move energy efficiency further up our priority list. So in the UK just now, the two big priorities for house building and house buying is the location of the house to highly rated Ofsted schools and number of bedrooms. After that, there's things like location of train stations, motorways, what have you. The Scottish Government did this exercise of reviewing building standards in Scandinavian countries a number of years ago. And the big difference between how we build and how they build, it wasn't the materials, it wasn't really the weather, it was down to the priorities of the buying population. So in Scandinavian countries, the energy efficiency and sustainability criteria of the building is about number 2 or 3, possibly number 4 in the priorities of most house buyers. So this labelling system, this metallic labelling system, was there to generate some interest in some competition. The problem with this, and again the problem with energy performance certificates, is they're produced and they tend to be put hidden somewhere in the house, not always easy to find. So really, the benefit of the self-builder is there to create some uniqueness in the market for them, to show the buying population that they are delivering more energy efficient homes. Really, the benefits aren't that explicit, because it does come down to cost for house building as well, but it's there to generate to show that they're more energy conscious, more sustainability conscious than other house builders. So over the next couple of decades, we want to see that becoming even more prevalent as to the colouring of it. So self-builders having a house, so the long-term goal is by having more energy efficient homes, getting a higher resale value. We're not quite there yet, but that's what these labelling systems are there to ultimately do, is to give self-builders the market advantage of achieving higher standards. It'll get there eventually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thanks for that, John. Some really good questions there that required a bit of detail, but I think we'll finish things there, and there's a link there where you can sort of keep up to date in what we're doing, and webinars in future, etc. And it's just for me now to say thanks very much to John, Scott, and Richard for joining us, and of course thanks to all of you for listening. Thank you and bye.